us about Africa, Black psychology, science, and transcendence. Oh, I think I left out physics. Rather, it was physics rather than science.
That's
Anyway, what's that?
That's part of science, I think.
It's all science, right? So I'm Linda James Myers. I'll be your moderator today, and we have our wonderful panelists with us as well. Elder Harvey Linder and young professional Joniesha Hickson, and our wonderful guest, Professor Hunter Adams. I'm going to let Hunter introduce himself, and we can jump right into our topic at hand after he has the opportunity to do this. I have to say, I've known Hunter for, I guess I have to say decades because of our convergence of our research. So happy to have you here.
Okay, I'm happy to be here, and thanks for this invitation. And I hope to add my 2 cents to this conversation, and I trust it will be edifying, illuminating, maybe for some people not on this call, irritating, because we have to deal with reality as we find it, and also reality as we edit it, and also reality as we manifest it. And I think that's keeping in with the spirit of Dr. Fukuya's term Zola, of self-actualizing continuous transcendence. You know, it's not a one-off thing that you meditate for 10 years and you reach enlightenment. But then after you do, you got to return back to the world, right? And engage the chaos, confusion, contradictions, and all of that. And that's really what we are seeing manifested right now in the United States with the current presidential campaigns. And I will say a little bit about what psychologists are calling blue lies. Have you anyone heard that term before?
Blue I have not.
Lies, right? And
are you talking about the police when they refer to police lives?
No, it has nothing to do with the police. Different? It's a certain, you've heard of white lies or so-called innocent lies, black lies, the evil lies, gray lies, what's in between. And now they have a term, thanks to President number 45, that they call blue lies, right? And it's a special form of disinformation, malinformation, and gaslighting. So we're going to deal with that. But anyway, I'm just an ordinary guy from the south side of Chicago, trying to figure out how the world works and how my mind works. And I want to thank my mentor, several deserve personal mention right now. Number one is Dr. Bobby Wright, a clinical psychologist trained at the University of Chicago, as he would say. And he told me back in the mid-70s, because I've always been interested in physics, the physics of things, particularly particle physics. And I worked at a Department of Energy National Accelerator Laboratory, and I co-designed what they call particle beam diagnostic equipment, also known as proportional wire chambers. At that time, I was a senior engineering technician, and I did that until Ronald Reagan drew the funding away for his Star Wars program. And Bobby said, Hunter, he said, you got to study the mind. That was his directive to me in the 70s. You got to study the mind, late 80s, early 80s. And lo and behold, I quit my job. I got accepted into University College London Institute of Psychiatry and Neuroscience graduate program. And that proved to be a transformative experience. It really got me into neuroscience. But of course, as big as the field of neuroscience is, 2 weeks ago, everyone, the Society for Neuroscience had their annual conference in Chicago. There were over 30,000 people there from all over the world trying to figure out how our brains work for many different purposes, by the way. There's ethical dimensions of neuroscience. Should neuroscience work be used to make more highly advanced weaponry, robotic human interfaces? Should neuroscience be used for more targeted means of persuasion, as in the Cambridge Analytical thing a few election cycle ago, of creating false Black organizations, right, following the sacrifice, some say murder, but it was a ritual sacrifice of George Floyd and others, many others, too many to name. So that's a huge thing. And unfortunately, there's only a handful of folks in neuroscience who look like us. Just a handful out of that 30,000, at least, who came to the conference. And so I was able to engage. I forgot to put some pictures up of around maybe 80 Blacks in neuroscience, a lot of young, newly minted professionals. And that was so encouraging. And many of them do have a sense of cultural, African-centered, to varying degrees, consciousness. So it filled me with hope, everyone, that, so I kind of switched over to trying to understand how culture works, right? How does culture impact how we sense things, how we relate, how we create, how we get along, how we solve conflicts? And so here's a quick example, because when they asked me, what do? I said, well, I'm in the cultural neuroscience. Not one person ever heard of cultural neuroscience before. Not one. No one knew what that was.
Mhm.
I said, well, it's a relatively new discipline branched off from social neuroscience, right? That more focuses on our social relations and also how our cultures impact our social relations. So it's only been around, maybe a decade and a half as a formal discipline, right? So here's what I told them. Take someone, a Baka or person, pejoratively a pygmy from Cameroon or the Congo. That's where they live, in the rainforest, right? Take another child who lives in Saudi Arabia, right? Take a third child who's a descendant of Eskimos. Take a fourth child who grows up on the plains of Kansas, right? All four of them have four profoundly different sensory experiences, right? The child who grows up in the rainforest in the Congo, they hear birds, they see a wide variety of animals, they hear insects, they have a wide variety of fruits and things to eat. The Baka people, for example, every day consume 20 varieties of mushrooms. And right now, mushrooms is a big thing in the United States, right? Particularly the psychedelic type. But someone in Saudi Arabia, that another child in Saudi Arabia, all they see is sand and sun. They don't hear the sounds of birds. They don't hear insects, right? The child who grows up in Alaska in the tundra, you know, they have a tradition of 30, 20 different words for snow, right? They see different kinds of animals. Their diet is different. Fish and other things, wild animals. Someone in the plains of Kansas, what do they see? All they see is grassland, hardly no animals, right? 4 different, profoundly different sensory experiences.
Mhm.
And so each of their brains have to learn how to adapt to those experiences because their entire sensory world has to predict what comes next. If you're in the rainforest, that child's got to predict when a gorilla might pop up, right? And what they need to do to evade it or kill it.
Mhm.
If the child in Saudi Arabia, they have to pay very close attention to the wind, to what the sand looks like at any given moment, to hear differentiate between different types of wind sounds, right? To know if a sandstorm is coming. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Our brains have to bear an inference and prediction, I'll use the word lightly, machine. They have to predict what comes next in order to be prepared to take evasive action or whatever. You see what I'm saying? So culture and environment influences profoundly how our brains are wired
Mhm.
and how we experience reality, how we experience other people, right? So if someone's in the rainforest, you know, they've learned over several 100,000 years when they see someone who's not part of their group, their small group, 50 to 150 people, do they automatically identify them as an enemy?
Mhm.
No. They want to know who that person is. They may need something. They may be able to provide something that they need. They may be able to enhance their own experience. They may have knowledge of where they come from that could be beneficial to them, and their knowledge beneficial to the strangers. So,
Mhm.
contrary to Darwin, with the survival of the fittest idea, for us to be here today, it was what? The survival of the friendliest, right?
Mhm.
We learned how to get along with strangers, right? It's a very different idea, but now science is showing that to be the case.
Right.
Darwin got that wrong, right? But someone who is raised in the Caucasus Mountains, Dr. Myers, right?
Mhm.
And resources are scarce. There's very little green things to consume except maybe a few months out the year. They learn that they have to really treasure those scarce resources. And if they see a stranger coming into their camp, they're automatically suspicious because they think that stranger may want to do what? Take their resources, take
Mhm.
their food. And so you can see kind of where I'm going with this, that they evolved in a different kind of way.
Mhm.
So that's a very brief overview of what cultural neuroscience is. And so you take the sisters in Ghana, um, in South Africa or India, they put these big pots of water and everything on their heads. I saw them when I was in Ethiopia, right? When Dr. Newton had a small tour group to Ethiopia, we saw women walking up mountains, a grade
Mhm.
with pots balanced on their heads or bushels of eucalyptus branches balanced on their head. So we can see where the notion of balance comes from. So their entire, not just Simone Giles, I mean, she got that from ancestors, right? She was able to retune her entire nervous system to a higher level of balance, right? Because that's what was one of the core virtues of old African societies is balance. We have to stay in balance. And right now we are what? We're out of balance because of society is out of balance. Balance is not one of this society's virtues. That's cultural neuroscience. That just imagine that, you know, all the muscles that had to be aligned in order and sequence for this woman to walk up a grade and keep that big pot of water or twigs perfectly balanced and not fall and she not trip. You kind of get a sense of that when you go to a restaurant and the waiter's got a platter with your meal and he's roaming around with one hand under the platter holding 4 plates. So that waiter has learned that sense of balance, but not to the same degree. So that's kind of a background for the few slides that I'll show, and you can feel free to interrupt me, you know, because it's a conversation.
All right.
Let's try to share.
I was just thinking about how I used to be a server and they used to have us like balance the plates. And I was like, I got a little natural inkling for this. So I must have that, you know, Afrocentric balance in me. Can't balance pots and water
So,
gallons on my head though. That's, you know, our family over there are way advanced.
I'm impressed.
so how can, oh, share, click share. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Whoops. So you see my screen?
We do.
Yes.
Okay.
You can see your slide.
So,
Are you able to put it in presentation mode though, so we can see it fully blown up on the screen?
so how do I do that?
So go to the top toolbar, click view. It's the third tab. Yeah, third tab right there.
Okay.
And then you should see
Slideshow.
or maybe slide. Go to the slideshow tab.
Slideshow.
Yeah, you got to go back up. Sorry about that. And
Slideshow.
then
I think if you go to slideshow, you may not be able to see your notes.
there we go.
If you have any notes.
Oh yeah.
Whoops.
All right. Well,
I
Professor
don't
Hunter,
think
if
he
you'd like
needs
to go
notes.
back.
He probably doesn't need any notes.
I don't think so.
Let me go back to, but you see the screen now?
We can.
Yeah, we
Can
see
see
it.
your
It should be
slide.
fine. Hopefully it'll be fine, I think. Let's see how it looks on Facebook.
See how.
Hunter, one of the things that you mentioned previously is that neuroscience has moved away from survival of fittest to survival of friendliness.
Right. Not just
How is it?
neuroscience, evolutionary biology.
Excellent. So oftentimes people aren't aware of that literature. So we still live in the culture that is survival of the fittest.
Yeah, we still live in that culture, right?
Where would we have our audience go to look for the neuroscience friendliest survival of friendliest literature?
What I'll do, I'll send you a couple of, let's see, just 1 second.
That's okay. I can get it from you and share it with people who are interested later.
Oops, well, I just had it out, but I can't.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
but it is
Yeah, why don't you tell us about your
friendly.
slides?
Okay. So we start with what do we really know, and what can we really know? And that is the DNA helix galaxy right there. So the question, whoops, what happened? So the question is there a universe inside out we could know? Is there a neuropsycho epigenetic continuity of consciousness which some experiences can trigger? So we have to start with, before we can answer those questions, this is our current cultural, social, psychological world. I know this is hard for many of us, maybe not all of you, but we live within primarily a Eurocultural context, right? And I have a few flags up there.
Okay.
Interpersonal, intrapersonal, social groups, organizations, and so forth. This is the environment with which we live. This environment with which we are constantly negotiating. So from that environment, let's go back that there's Western ways of knowing reality. And there's three. Science, from the Latin word scientia, meaning knowledge, and the scientific method since the roughly 17th century encourages practitioners to observe from a, quote, detached, objective manner the physical universe, to understand and theorize about it in order to influence it to someone's benefit or others' detriment, right? So then we have religion, from the Latin word religio, which means to bend backwards. Not quite like Sankofa, but I've heard some people say it's a Sankofa sense. And religion encourages a sense of wonder, awe, transcendence, or the need for salvation. Religion sees human actions and connections to the universe through a hierarchy of one or more controlling divine entities and their human agents. Then we have, quote, magic, from the Greek word magiki, and it encourages a sense of kinship, that there's a participatory nature of the universe. And, quote, magic understands humans are in a matrix of energy and forces which influences our minds and well-being. And magic is something that is difficult to control. And also one has to figure out what is real and what is an illusion. You know, how our senses may have been fooled into seeing things that aren't there. When you see someone on a stage and they pull a rabbit out of a hat and there was no rabbit before, so then the question is that many have is, how was that possible? Right? But that's not the term, that's not how the idea was translated from a Kemetic word, and that word is called Heka, Ka meaning energy. Heka is the direction of that energy in of a sense of profound perception of reality. Heka. So
you said we could jump in and ask you questions.
yeah.
So like what on the slide you just showed, another way of characterizing that slide that's been shared with me is that at some point in our past history, we um, not necessarily us, but Western science, separated the physical world from the metaphysical world, the
Right,
transphysical world, and the physical world was the study of the physical world was focused on as science, and the metaphysical world, uh, religion became relegated to the realm of the metaphysical. And magic was simply defined as science that we don't understand yet. Like things that we don't understand, we think of them as magical because we
right.
don't understand the forces that propel them from beneath the surface. But I wonder if you could talk about that whole concept of how our Kemetic ancestors would have looked at the metaphysical world as underlying the physical world and of creating the physical world, that the physical world is created out of the metaphysical.
That's a good point, and something that we could spend a whole hour on, but for the sake of time, um,
Because we only have a whole hour.
okay, well, we're running out of time. So we start with the whole notion for the Western world, Europeans, that nature is a machine, right? Rene Descartes declared he saw no difference between machines made by craftsmen and various body that nature alone composes. Then
Mhm.
you have more recently, Richard Dawkins, philosopher, writes that the machine metaphor morphed into the computer metaphor,
Mhm.
that now life is just bytes and bytes and bytes of digital information. There's others now who say that everything is just information, that the information is integrated within us. But there's problems with these metaphors because they, at least since the Greeks, have, particularly in the Christian Bible, say that you're supposed to despise the flesh, right? And deal with the spirit. But when we look at the origin of the word spirit, it just simply means breath,
Mhm.
right? And it gets to problems with language, and I'll talk a
Right.
little bit about that. But those terms don't quite capture really what we're dealing with.
Right.
That is there only a material reality? Then they would say there's a non-material reality, there's a metaphysical reality.
Right.
And those are ideas that we have to unpack. And I will do that to some degree here.
Well, doesn't part of the confusion come from looking at a metaphor, which is to say something is like something else,
Right.
and then replacing that metaphorical reference to actually saying something is something else. So when you say it operates sort of like a machine, that's not the same as saying it is a machine.
Exactly. Exactly. And see, that's part of the problem we have with language, with all languages, is because we're trying to translate ideas into electrochemical signals, which we in turn then reinterpret, right, and give meaning to.
Mhm.
So, how can we more accurately do that is a challenge. So, what language allows that to happen? You take two different species, a human being and a dog. Somehow, something has to happen for that dog to understand human language, human intentions. So
Mhm.
there's a translation issue that we're constantly up against. So people are trying to find better and better metaphors. And I'm going to come to that in a second, but let me just run through some of these. So we're dealing with a cosmology of colonialism, right?
Mhm.
There is an epistemic challenge that we're caught in a whirlwind between science and religion, not so much magic now. And so, unless we really look carefully at those different ways of knowing, different bodies of knowledge, different disciplines,
Mhm.
we're not going to figure our way out of this. So, can the new African social theory, a narrative, realign magic, faith, and science? Can we come up with a new theory, social theory, that breaks the narrative of the science of oppression,
Mhm.
as Jake Carruthers talked about? That there's a science of oppression, and that's what we're in. So we have to be able to combat that. We have a global psychopathic system
Mhm.
of white privilege and domination, the operational framework of racism and caste for wealth extraction, management, and defense. You know, this is the system that we live in. So how can we break through of that? The first thing, as Dr. Welsing has said, we're in denial about a war against our existence. There's some people who believe that we shouldn't exist.
Mhm.
There's roughly 43 million of them in this country that wish that we were not in existence. And so we're out of balance. We're out of cosmic alignment. We live in somebody else's idea of us. We live in somebody else's time frame. We're entangled in someone else's reality.
Mhm.
Here's to show you how problematic that is. I don't know if you can see this whole thing or not, but a decade and a half ago, the NAACP sent out a request for funding on an envelope. This came to my mother, who was a member. It said, skin color, a deadly pre existing condition. This was an envelope requesting funds for their organization. It's saying that there's something fundamentally wrong with us. That's profound, that we have to strip away our melanin. And so now we have young people who are trying to understand this, young African American children, teenagers, in order to socialize. They're asking their fellow students, what percentage white are you? Right? Well, I'm a third white. How about you? I'm 50%. I ain't white. Dr. Myers, that's a profound psychological state that young people are in. That's how deep this goes. So we have to be able to combat that. So how do sociopathic systems manifest itself? Through ideologies, interests, institutions, and individuals. And so my dear friend who made a transition, Patricia Ann Newton, transcultural and forensic psychiatrist, talks about in her book, I hope one day to get it published, The Drama of the Trauma, how self-hate exists. Malcolm X asked, who taught you to hate yourself? But then we learned that everybody does it to some degree. And so we have this battle, Marvin Gaye, in our lifetime, ourselves as angels and ourselves as some demonic character. So my friend and journalist Salim Muakil said the greatest addiction, we're all addicted to someone else's interpretation of reality.
Mhm.
So Jay Carruthers tells us that we're in a state of intellectual warfare and that language is a weapon, as Robin D.G. Kelly says, that language is both the weapon and the terrain of struggle.
Mhm.
Nothing is eternal. Language reveals, conceals, delimits, and produces meaning all at once. So we have a solution, the no race cream. That's what's being advocated. No CRT because there's no races, right? This is the cover of a newspaper published in Chicago. So the question is, dismantle racism in psychiatry and psychiatry. Racism in America is like dust in the air. It seems invisible, even if you're choking on it until you let the sun in.
Mm.
So here we are. How do we repair these hidden wounds? So we have to go back to something that we've always had. Back in April of this year, I was a delegate to the third session of the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent at the United Nations. I walked into the building, the big conference building, walked up the escalator because the escalator wasn't working. I get to the second floor and I'm greeted by the goddess Ma'at. She says, "What's up, Hunter? Welcome." You know what it's like to be embraced by a goddess that I've been talking about for 30 years. But here's the thing, almost no one, 800 people, knew what that represented. They were there trying to come up with ways to reinvent a new social theory, a new foundation for moral ideals, justice, and sustainable socialization practices. But we had it already. All we have to do is reinvent it from the best practices of African societies everywhere. I just had to show that. So one of the things we need to do, we have to disrupt things, right? We got to disrupt this thing. So we have to engage the brain semantic space because words is not just the brain lateralization thing that we all learned. The left hemisphere is language and the right hemisphere is emotion and creativity. And men are rational because they are left hemisphere dominant, and women are right hemisphere dominant and therefore emotional. We've heard that before. And then we have the reptilian brains that's really what's governing everything. But there's so many problems with that understanding that's all now have been shown to be false. Brains didn't evolve into three different brains over millions of years. We came with a package of all three. I mean, that's just how it is. And so language is utilized all over the brain. For example, if you use words like run, jump, speak, you know what's happening? Those words are engaging the premotor cortex for some action. Those are action words. So we have to be very careful when we use words, particularly first and second persons. Because when, for example, when a doctor says, you go to the office and the doctor says, "Oh, You have pre-diabetes. There's radio ads in Chicago. Take the pre-diabetes test over radio and not even see a physician, right? If you're overweight, raise one finger. You know, if you live in a poor community, raise two fingers. If you eat lots of junk food, raise three fingers. You have just taken the pre-diabetes test. You
Oh, no.
pre-diabetes. That is absolutely unethical. There's only two countries on the planet that allow for drug advertising, the United States and New Zealand. No other country allows for pharmaceutical products, diagnoses to take place via TV or any other type of media. Because you've heard of the placebo, that which pleases, where there's also something called the nocebo, that which harms. So words can harm, words can heal. In fact, there's a number of researchers, this is exploding now, the placebo nocebo research is exploding because someone's words can induce a condition that they didn't have before, right? We've heard of psychosomatic injuries, right? But so now there's the data, there's experiments that show that words, drugs, and hypnosis can have the exact same effect in producing or alleviating pain, right? It's just that the drugs last a bit longer. That's a profound thing. So we have to be careful listening to people because they may be unwittingly making suggestions that's hurting us. We have to be very careful of that. So I know this is kind of hard to see, but anyway, this was something that Dr. Newton and I were working on, and I'm going to come to that in a minute, that there's two different explanatory models of illness and medical beliefs, right? Going back to the earlier slide of Western ideas of knowing, of science, religion, and magic, where there's two explanatory models. You have the internal model, right? That everything is happening from within. You know, the most obvious thing is the whole genetic model. It's in your genes. All diseases can be reduced to gene malfunctions and so forth. That is happening from within. There's something wrong with this organ system. But one of the problems with the internal model is they're disconnected. If you have something wrong, for example, why is it that so many women, particularly Black women, have uterine fibroids and breast cancer, and Black men have prostate cancer? There's something known as racialized stress. And racialized stress can cause a dysregulation in all the body systems, particularly sleep. And we have to have the bare absolute minimum of 5, preferably 6, 7 hours of sleep every night. So insomnia is a huge problem in this country for many people. And so people are rushing to take melatonin. But the problem with melatonin, 95% of the melatonin on the market is synthetic melatonin. And it doesn't have the cofactors that natural melatonin has. And so melatonin just by itself can have a range of effects. Yes, it may help you sleep, but then after it wears off, you'll wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, or it may make you agitated. And so now the thing people are recommending is that you take a phytomelatonin or a plant-based melatonin that has some of those other cofactors that you would normally get in food. So then you have the external way, and many of the indigenous folks, African folks, look at external things that, oh, it was a spirit that got on you, that caused your problem. And so we have to work with the spirit. We have to do rituals. Sacrifices have to be made, and so forth, because the locus of the problem is external. But now we have to say that it's both and, it's not either or. So we have to have more effective means of making an assessment of what the condition, the illness, or the pathology is, to have some sort of healing system that may encompass, taking some substance, plant, or whatever, even a drug if necessary, and also doing rituals, doing self-actualization, having mindfulness meditation. All those things are important, but one by themselves is not quite enough.
Right.
We have to do more.
And that's kind of what we've been talking about in the past, helping ourselves move from a dichotomy, to a more diunital thinking about how we approach these problems, rather than looking at them as external versus internal, but looking at the dynamic interaction between the world we live in and the physical, bodies that we have and the physical insults to the bodies, how we transcend that by looking not just at the physical, but at the transphysical as well, and the interaction between the two.
Exactly. So that's why the ostrich, and you see many societies have ostrich feathers, because an ostrich has a 360-degree worldview. They have a worldview of the totality. So our curiosity can trigger a neuroepigenetic effect of self-remembrance, a Sankofa moment, a new narrative, that we have that within us. We can do that. So one of the things Dr. Landre Oubre wrote in her book, Instinct and Revelation, Reflections on the Origins of Numinous Perception. And that just simply means the whole idea of transcendence. And so recently, about 10 years ago in South Africa, a new human species was found, Homo naledi, in some caves outside of Johannesburg. Been dated to, I'll just say, average 270,000 years ago. Now, what makes them so significant is that they found the first recorded evidence of deliberate, intentional burial of their deceased individuals. Okay, so what? But they also found evidence that they did rituals for their deceased relatives. And inside the cave, they left markings so that they could transfer that knowledge to another generation. So this is the origin of the whole notion of self-transcendence that human beings developed 270,000 years ago. And every society since has been working through this model, this idea that they developed in their own different ways, of course, in their own different spaces and so forth. But what the most significant thing is the notion of self-transcendence began 270,000 years ago. And now there's data for that. So where's the data, Hunter? The data is rock art all over the continent, that as various Homo species groups spread out over the continent, they left art. They left rock art, drawing their experiences so they could share with the next generation. Even ideas of astral traveling. There's rock art, I don't have it here, I can show it another time. The Cave of Swimmers, it was a subject of a movie called The English Patient, right? Where they found this cave in the Western Egyptian desert near Libya, where they had painted men, women seemingly floating or swimming in astral space within their own consciousness. And so I show on the right, these were trade routes right across the continent. So ideas spread. That's what I mean. They spread all over the continent. So the question is, who are you and who are you not? So Lorenzo Simpson said, we must risk who we think we are, what we take the meaning of our experience to be, in order to begin possession, I would say repossession of who we are. So my sister, Nana Sekhmet Patricia Newton, said, let's heal the harm. And how do we do this? So one of the things that Zola is talking about is showing your power. Rachel Farrell, one of the most incredible singers I've ever witnessed, came to Chicago and did a performance, and she said, show your power. She did a monologue. Folks were thrown off. That wasn't what they were expecting. Show your power, right? But first, we have to trust ourselves. We've been socialized to not trust ourselves. And so we have to relearn how to trust ourselves from the outside, inside out, trusting oneself in one's capacities and one's conscience, and then demonstrate that trust in our behaviors. And then outside in, social experience-driven trust, internalization of the other, in our collective capacities, in our ancestral conscience, in our cultural immune system. We have to build up a cultural immune system to protect us from all this disinformation. So what is our power? Our underlying magic. And by that, I mean our profound sense of perception of reality on multiple different levels and dimensions. Our creativity, our compassion, our resistance and persistence. So the question is, can people see your power? Can they feel your passion? And so this should have been earlier on comedic words for brain, mind, perception, and disorder.
Okay.
So the challenge is, do not give away your power. There's a Zen proverb that says, only tell 30% when you're engaging particularly competitors or adversaries. Don't tell them everything. In fact, maybe not even 20%. So now I'm winding down here. So part of the Western way of seeing things is that the self or our identity is an unchangeable thing. Once we get out of adolescence, well, then the self is fixed, right? But in the African point of view, there was many different dimensions of self, of the person. So in Kemet, you had the Aku, or spirit, or light,
Mm-hmm.
the Sahu, quote, spirit body, the Sekhem, our life force, Kat, the physical body, heart, the Ib, our conscience,
Mm-hmm.
Ba, translated as soul, Ka, the double, Rin, our name. So names are very important. You know, that's why in Roots, when they were renaming Force Kunta Kinte, that now your name is Toby.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can our ancestors teach us? What did they draw on walls? Now, this is a huge painting on a rock in Chad, West Africa. What do you see? They're two dancing women.
Mm-hmm.
Their faces are aglow. There's a ball of light above their head, or a halo. Their hands are raised.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen anything like that before?
Mm-hmm.
Or close?
It seems like they're praising something.
Ah,
This nature.
this is 20,000 years before the present. They left a message for their people to see on a rock.
Mm-hmm.
And then Akhenaten developed his theology of light in the 18th dynasty,
Mm-hmm.
which few talk about. You know, they want to say he worshiped Aten, the one God, but that's not quite right. His hymn to Aten was a praise poem to Neter Aten, the Ak, or the inner light.
Mm-hmm.
The inner light. Oh, Hunter, you're just talking metaphysics here. Inner light, right? That's what you would think. Most people would think. But let's go to the Bible. Bible 1, Abba Elohim, unity of power and nature. John 10:30, I and the Father are one. Know that the Father is in me and I the Father. I said, you are Elohim in Psalms. Now, we don't hear that in church too much, do we?
Mm-hmm.
Except Charlemagne, right? That you are deities.
Mm-hmm.
Genesis 1:27, the powerful one, Elohim, filled man with a functional representation of himself. And that was light. So we have India read her song, I am light. I am not the things my family did. I'm not the voices in my head. I'm not the pieces, brokenness inside. I'm not the mistake that I have made or any things that cause me pain. I'm not the pieces of the dream I left behind. I'm not the color of my eyes. I'm not the skin on the outside. I'm not my age. I'm not my race. My soul inside is all light. I am light. I am divinity defined. I am the God on the inside. I'm a star and a piece of it. I am all light. Okay, well, that's metaphor, right? Y'all believe that's metaphor, right?
It's
No.
That
funny.
before,
Metaphysical.
right? So let me go back
It's
here.
metaphysical and actual.
See that book there? It says electromagnetic bioinformation.
Mm-hmm.
We know today that man, human beings, essentially is a being of light. And that guy at the bottom is Fritz Albert Popp. In 2001, I did a summer school at his laboratory outside of Dusseldorf, Germany. Now forget the Chinese woman's name, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what did I learn? That here's a picture of a pregnant woman. The baby is emitting light. Here's a picture of a human brain, and the brain is emitting light from a Japanese guy's lab. So there is, at this time, presidential nominee Barack Obama being surrounded by AME bishops. What are they doing?
Praying over him or for him.
Laying on
They
hands.
got their laying on of hands. You saw the hands raised in that picture. Look, the hands, the fingers are emitting infrared light. This is not metaphysical. These are photons. A Qigong master is increasing the temperature of the palms of her hands, and with seconds, her hands are emitting infrared light.
Mm-hmm.
Human photon emission. I was there. Harvey, Linder, Joniesha, I was there in his lab witnessing this with my own eyes.
Well, you say it's not metaphysical, but indeed it is both physical and metaphysical.
It's more, it's all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is our fundamental identity, as India Rees sang about,
Mm-hmm.
that we are literally beings of light. We are energetic beings. Cells communicate via light. All this has been documented now. So we have to walk in our light, generate goodness, share happiness, and flee the colonization, leave that behind. So it's not too late to heal the harm. We can show up wherever we are. And one of the most fundamental things that I'm talking about in my forthcoming book next year is to building upon the idea that our ancestors in Kemet left us, and that is the notion of this more complex notion of self,
Mm-hmm.
a mosaic self that includes our ancestors, because we have a system in our brains called the mirror neuron system. And the mirror neuron system, which I'm sure y'all are familiar with, records all the interactions that we see with that other people make.
Mm-hmm.
Everything.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, I think this is
we
very, very profound.
We are basically interacting, and I don't have time to go to really break all that down now, another time. We're
Mm-hmm.
interacting with models of other people.
Mm-hmm.
Until we touch. We're interacting with the models that they have made of themselves over time, and they are interacting with the model of us.
Mm-hmm.
A quick example, and then we can have some dialogue. When the ex-president Donald J. Trump was on the debate stage with Kamala Harris, the vice president, Trump had a model of her. The model of her to him was she's ignorant, she's stupid, she's mentally, he didn't use the word retarded, but he has used mentally disabled since birth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That there's something wrong with her. Right? She's incompetent. She doesn't know anything. Where did he get that from? For 4 years, that's what the Washington media were reporting about Kamala Harris. They were framing her that she doesn't do anything. She doesn't know anything. She's not smart. There's a ton of articles that framed her for 4 years like that. And Black women get that all the time, being framed. And so that was the image that he had of her. Her image of him was a criminal, a sexual abuser, a con man, someone who doesn't keep his promises, who pathologically lies, and he tells blue lies, which are absolute total falsehoods, which is the opposite of the truth.
Mhm.
He says that she's incompetent, but he's projecting his own incompetence, his own lack of confidence going up against someone that he had a false impression of.
Mhm.
And so blue lies, and I'll come to that, when he said, oh, FEMA says they're only paying $750 and giving millions to migrants in Florida and North Carolina. That wasn't just a lie. That was a fabrication. He was gaslighting her and her administration. And so, because she understood him and he had the wrong model of her, he was constantly getting caught in traps.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, Hunter, we're out of time.
Okay,
So
I'm finished now.
yeah, well, we'll just have to have you back. Can you quickly tell us the name of the last book you showed about our being light? It was electromagnetism.
Okay.
I think our
It's called
audience.
Bioinformation. It's a hard book to find. Electromagnetic Bioinformation. The author is Fritz Albert Popp. And if you want to do research, just research the term biophotons or biophotonics or the light within our cells.
Mhm.
And
That
you'll
is so.
find, what's that?
No, I was just affirming how important that is because it helps people shift their consciousness from that fragmented, dichotomous either or, we're physical or metaphysical, and it helps us fuse the reality that is not the reality we've been brainwashed to believe. So
Right.
thank you so much.
Well,
I
thank
don't
you
think
for having me.
it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We don't have any time for any more questions. We'll absolutely have to have you back to discuss this further because I think for most people, this is new information. And it's critical information because it's impossible to get rid of the lie if you don't know the truth. And what you've been doing with us this afternoon is sharing from so many levels of cultural neuroscience, the truth of it all that our ancestors knew from the beginning. So thank you so very much.
And thank you for having me. And I look forward to doing it again with part 2.
Excellent, excellent. And listeners, thank you so much for joining us. And we wish you the best and peace, love, and care for yourself and one another. Zola up.